It's a classic fantasy story that you've probably heard a 1,000 times at this point. A young woman, unhappy with the doldrum, humdrum life of being a noblewoman and financially secure and safe. You know, she has it in her mind. You know what I want to do? I want to go on adventures, because this life that I'm currently leading just doesn't provide me enough, you know? So, you know, she picks up a weapon, masters the skills of it, maybe picks up a few spells, and, well, you know what? Starting out on an adventuring career, you know, she takes what she assumes will be a easy job, such as, you know, ridding a village of being plagued and harassed by goblins. Now, the thing is, goblins don't really like people interfering with, you know, their raiding and pillaging. So, okay, so this young noblewoman, she and her party members decide, okay, wow, you know what? We're gonna go and we're gonna wipe them out, but we're gonna do it strategically. We're gonna do it intelligently, you know? And the plan, I would say that it goes sideways, but in this case, it just goes full horizontal. No. Okay. This party then disappears, and for several weeks, no one has heard from them. Okay, so what do we do? What do we do now? Oh, I don't know. Maybe call in someone to deal with the situation. So, of course, I recently saw Goblin Slayer, Goblin's Crown, the first film in the series. And so, okay, what leads into this whole story is that Goblin Slayer and his party have to essentially track down and rescue a noblewoman, and then the rest of the party. Okay, the whole movie begins with Goblin Slayer receiving a telegram, letter, I don't know exactly like the best word to like phrase it as, but a request from the Holy Sword Maiden. It's like, okay, Goblin Slayer, you know, this young noblewoman, you know, she thought she had everything figured out. She went on an adventure to kill goblins, and well, she hasn't been seen or heard from since. Please do something about this. I mean, in and of itself, okay, I want to say that, like, okay, probably the quest was deserving in and of itself because, well, you know, these adventurers, they've gone missing. The thing is, this is why we called in Goblin Slayer and Company, is because this young woman, she comes from money. There we go. She's a noblewoman, and she hasn't been heard of in several weeks. So Goblin Slayer's party has to, you know, go to the village where she was assigned this quest and figure out what's happened to her. Now, immediately, something that comes up is that the party is nowhere to be found. They do find the noblewoman. Unfortunately, not in the best condition. It's clear that she has been captured and tortured by her captors. After they rescue her, you know, they quickly devise a more elaborate plan on how to wipe out the local goblin threat. This film is a really good primer if you're wanting to get into the series. If you haven't seen the first season and you're uncertain as to like whether or not, you know, this is your speed, your temperature, things like that, I would say actually, like, okay, watch this film first and then make your decision. All right, Goblin Slayer as a series is noted for graphic violence. Okay, I mean, and it's not the most violent anime that I've seen in recent years, and yet it doesn't hold back, it doesn't pull any punches. So what happens is after they hear her story about how the mission didn't go well, and after she was captured, unfortunately, and they do show this, so I'm mentioning this, spoilers, you know, I am mentioning certain details because the violence is rather blunt. So what happens is they find a brand mark on the back of her neck. This was put there by the goblins because of a ritual involving the god of wisdom. And an immediate question comes up, It's like, well, what are goblins doing worshiping the god of wisdom? Well, these goblins that have been harassing this unnamed village have been upping their game recently, partially due to leadership. They're being led by a goblin paladin. From what we've seen, this goblin paladin is a rather significant threat. Not only do they have high physical and combat stats, but also they actually have, in theory, we don't actually see them use magic, but since Goblin Slayer is based on a prototypical D&D setting, we can kind of assume that there's at least some arcane knowledge, if nothing else. We don't see the Goblin Paladin using magic, and yet there is something that his troops, his forces, definitely stand out as being a greater threat than perhaps other goblin nests and goblin hordes. And that is that they are progressively learning. When Goblin Slayer and his party initially have a skirmish with the goblins, they notice that, when they were taking hostages, they're much more organized, and their defenses for one of the nests is much more detailed and elaborate than other goblin nests that they've come across. And the reason is because the Goblin Paladin has kind of brought them into a kind of worship of the God of Wisdom. Okay? Now, when it comes to this film, one of the things I really do appreciate is they're building up and fleshing out a lot of the fantasy elements of this. I mean, we're learning piecemeal throughout the entire series. And I say that as someone who's really, I'm going to be honest, I've only seen the first season as of yet. The second season hasn't had a wide release, not that I'm aware of. And so a lot of what we learn is either from this first season, or you can actually learn a lot from this movie as well. Because this is a longer set story, there are several occasions where during their mission, they have a good number of sit-downs, and you have a bigger fleshing out of these different characters. Our primary characters are, of course, Goblin Slayer. The name says it all. This is his name is his mission. He must slay goblins. You have the priestess, lizard cleric priest. I know that he's listed as priest if you Wikipedia or Google him. He could be a battle cleric, I suppose, or a priest, I suppose. But anyways, dwarf druid, and for high elf archer, they just usually call her elf. They don't actually say high elf archer. Get that one. It's no, that's a bit of a mouthful. Anyways, and as a supplementary character for this film, we have noble fencing woman, fencer. I guess the series goes out of its way to avoid a lot of name usage. Usually they just stick to titles. Priest, or usually priest, priestess, Goblin Slayer, and then dwarf and elf. They don't really don't even have euphemisms. They just say you, human. To the best of my knowledge, Goblin Slayer and Priestess are the only humans among them, but instead of just saying, girl human, man human, good job on that goblin slaying, they don't do that. It's very simplified. Anyways, before I get off track, one of the things that I appreciate about this film is that we learn more about our characters, of course, but we also have a reiteration of a bigger theme in the overall storytelling of this world, which is always be prepared, expect the unexpected, and never underestimate the effects of trauma. One of the things that they do, as I mentioned, unfortunately showcase is the torture of this young woman. Now, if you have a problem with, like graphic violence and partial nudity, and when I say partial, I'm not trying to downgrade it or anything like that. The ritual where she is used, I suppose, as an offering for their god of wisdom, does have her to where she is undressed, but you don't see anything front or anything particularly controversial or scandalous. That being said, the violence in and of itself is rather hard-hitting. So, again, I say that this is a decent primer for the series proper. If you haven't seen the show yet, it'll give you a good idea and a good understanding as to exactly, what to expect. Now, okay, so they get the mission, they go on the mission, they rescue the young woman, and, okay, everything's kosher, right? No. Okay, no. Because the Goblin Paladin leads a cult of goblins as a means to, build up a base, probably wants to become a Goblin Lord, as we saw at the very end of the first season, but, apparently there's steps that you have to take, and so he has to appease this one specific deity. This is kind of a means to an end. And, another thing that I do like about how they build up, this world in this film is that, wait a second. One of the characters brings up the God of Wisdom. God of Wisdom, that why would such a god that sounds so benevolent, be working with, such horrible creatures like these goblins? And the priestess, as someone who is educated in the various religions and liturgies of this world, goes on to explain, well, there's two, in the sphere of gaining knowledge or wisdom, there's two gods. One is the God of Wisdom, who he'll tell you what you want to know, and you don't care what happens with it. This is a deity that does not care about any consequence about who gets hey, someone approaches him and then wants to know a fire spell, theoretically. A fire spell? Okay, and I guess as long as you make the right offerings, yeah, there you go. Here's the spell. Do what you want with it, kid. Have a great time. And if the world burns, oh well. So that's the God of Wisdom. It's described as eccentric and mysterious, and then there's the God of Knowledge. And the God of Knowledge, you actually have to work for it, all right? If you seek epiphanies or enlightenment or some aid in trying to learn something, okay, then you make your solicitations to the God of Knowledge. But you got to work for it, because he's not going to give just anybody, trade secrets of the universe. Mostly because apparently that God realizes that, this is just asking for trouble, So, more benign, I suppose, than anything. So you have these, this mythology that is built up between these two deities. And so the Paladin, now building up his forces, especially something that the series does a decent job of establishing, is that the more knowledge they gain, the more of a threat they become. Okay, so this is pretty big. If this becomes a full-blown horde under a very powerful Goblin Lord, okay, we got some problems here. So, our man with the plan, Goblin Slayer. Okay, he goes to work. This is a very well-developed, well-paced story. I know that there are certain versions that I've heard of, because I haven't seen this myself. The version that I saw was just above an hour, but apparently there are versions where they claim that there's a 30-minute recap of season 1, which I have not seen. Not entirely sure what streaming service has the edition where they have that add-on. It's always described as a detriment to the overall viewing experience, and so I don't know, maybe when I was lucky, I only saw the edition there where it takes about an hour. They go through the paces, and then goblins are slain. And for a short while, the land is at peace. It's never at peace. It's never at peace, because otherwise we wouldn't have a story involving Goblin Slayer. Spoilers. Anyways, so like what we have with this is a really well done story. Okay, there's not a whole lot of things that I don't really like about this one, and I realize I say that and like, because part of like criticism should involve at least like, okay, like name something that you didn't like. Honestly though, this delivered on what it promised. You know, are you familiar with Goblin Slayer? If you're not, once again, you know that this world will, you know, introduce you to the stakes involved. This is not a fun Adventure Time setting. This is not something where like, okay, we can go through all of this nonsense and we're just like, oh, maybe. I'm a little worse for wear, but I'm fine. No, one of the things that this like film and this story setting does extremely well is as a message. You know, always be prepared. Always have a plan. Always have a strategy when it comes to these things. You know, especially for no one sees those curveballs in life. You know, like coming your way, and if you're not careful, well, you get hit in the head. You know. I've gone on a number of different tangents, and the long and the short of it is, if you are uncertain whether or not you can even get into this, you know, I would say give Goblin's Crown a watch. Give it a watch and see if this is your speed, because it's pretty much a good example of the series proper. Capsulated into a single long, you know, like a longer length like story, but all the same, still like really good quality, of course, and you know, just tight cast of characters, showcasing that when you're in the thick of it, you need to know that you can survive with the people that you surround yourself with. You know, if I had to say that there's a little bit of like a lesson involved here, is that okay, if plans don't go well, you know, don't let your group dissolve. You know, don't like the original party, the original adventuring party that went after the first goblin nest. They had a plan, and they thought, okay, this is a good plan. They had a few minor setbacks, and instead of reassessing their situation, they said, you know what? We're just gonna dig our heels in, and we're gonna make this bad plan work. No, it did not work out that way. So, anyways, Goblin Slayer, Goblin's Crown, and I know. Okay, so something that I kind of hinted and winked at in the thumbnail here is like, who's gonna win? The show's named Goblin Slayer. The movie is Goblin Slayer, Goblin's Crown. The climactic fight is not what I thought it was going to be. I guess that's one of the very few minuses against this, is that like, no, it's actually not. Goblin Slayer doesn't slay goblins for glory. Goblin Slayer doesn't, you know, free communities from harassment from goblins so that he could become this grand heroic legend. The climactic battle doesn't really like matter too much on Goblin Slayer versus Goblin Paladin. One, I think we can make an educated guess if you're familiar with the setting as to who's going to come out on top, but also Goblin Slayer thinks of strategies that will win the day. He will devise some sort of tactic or system of tactics in order to come out on top. You know, slay the goblins and free people from, you know, the general malice that goblins entail. So, Goblin Slayer, Goblin's Crown. Yeah, I give it a very strong recommendation. If you haven't seen Goblin Slayer the series as of yet, give this show a watch and then decide for yourself if this is something that you want to become a little bit more invested with. It might not be for you, you know? Because this is not a happy-go-lucky fantasy film. And I'm not saying that as a judgment. I'm just saying that, like, if you feel that you don't... If there are certain elements that you don't like, such as, you know, like... and this is just varying tastes here. If you have a weak stomach or weaker stomach when it comes to certain types of violence, or even, you know, depictions of attack. I say attack because, like, there wasn't anything like sexual implied with the fencer, and in her torture, there was torture, and yeah, go figure. Some people don't like watching that. So, all right, word to the wise. Full disclosure up front. You know, it is pretty violent. Like I said. The only nudity is partial nudity in there, but if these elements, you already know that that's not for you, then, well, hey, we all have our tastes. Anyways, Goblin Slayer, Goblin's Crown, solid recommendation. Thank you very much. If you made it this far, thank you so much. I appreciate it. You're a champ. And anyways, thank you for joining me on Movie Ninja. Please like and subscribe if you like this video, and I'll talk to you later.